Ozzy Osbourne may be no more, but he made sure that the world knew the artist he hated so much that they threatened his happiness.
Not all the time is everybody, hi, I'm happy, it's like, fuck up.
And here are 8 of them. Starting our list at number 8 is Bob Daisley. They did not start as enemies. When Ozzy was kicked out of Black Sabbath in 1979, Bob Daisley showed up at the exact moment Ozzy needed saving. He helped put together Ozzy's new band, wrote songs with him, and played bass on Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman. Those 2 albums became the launchpad for Ozzy's solo career. Without them, there may not have been a Prince of Darkness as we know him today. So how did a man who was once Ozzy's creative lifeline become the source of decades of bitterness? The first cracks were not about friendship but about money and credit. In the mid-1980s, Bob Daisley and drummer Lee Kerslake took Jet Records to court over royalties and songwriting rights. Sometimes they won, sometimes they lost. But what mattered most was that these battles left behind scars. What could have been solved with quiet negotiations instead became public fights. And when money and pride get tangled together, it is only a matter of time before things explode. That explosion came in 2002. While Daisley and Kerslake were still chasing royalty claims, the Osbourne camp reissued Blizzard and Diary with the original bass and drum parts completely erased. They were replaced with new recordings. Fans were furious. Daisley called it a betrayal of history. Ozzy and Sharon, however, framed it as a business decision. To many, it looked like punishment for daring to sue. And this is where the relationship between Ozzy and Daisley went from strained to almost impossible to repair. Even though later anniversary editions restored Bob's original parts, the damage had been done. Every time the wounds seemed to heal, another lawsuit opened them back up. In 2016, Daisley once again sued for unpaid royalties on classics like Crazy Train. The Osbourne camp responded with anger, calling the repeated lawsuits nothing more than harassment. Sharon even lashed out publicly, which only added more fuel to the fire. This was never just about personality. It was about the pain of being erased, the bitterness of endless courtrooms, and the feeling of betrayal on both sides. Daisley believes he built the foundation of Ozzy's empire and was robbed of what was rightfully his. Ozzy's camp believes Daisley simply refused to let go. In the end, what began as a partnership that gave birth to 2 of the greatest albums in heavy metal turned into a feud that has lasted decades. And in the world of rock and roll, grudges do not fade quietly. While Ozzy was the one doing the backstabbing, this next person was the one who wronged Ozzy. So number 7 is Tony Iommi. He and Ozzy Osbourne knew each other when they were still kids. He grew up in Birmingham and even attended Birchfield Road School with Ozzy. This was way before the 2 of them had any idea that they would be part of one of the biggest rock bands in history, but they didn't start together. It took a departure from his first band, Mythology, to be united with Ozzy to form a new band and start performing gigs together. Given their history, their chemistry was unmatched, and it was evident in the songs they wrote and how they performed. But their friendship would take a drastic turn in 1979 when Iommi, alongside Geezer Butler and Bill Ward, voted to have Ozzy Osbourne kicked out of his band due to his addiction and abuse problems. Iommi felt that Ozzy had been holding the band back, and keeping him would have caused the band to break up. And since he was the one attending meetings with the record company, he had an idea about how bad things were looking. In an interview with Music Radar, he said this: "I was in a terrible position because I was the one who used to go to meetings with the record company. I'd go over to Warner Brothers and they'd say, 'How's the album coming along?' 'Oh, all right. When can we hear some tracks?' Soon." I was lying. It just wasn't happening. We were coming up with riffs, but Ozzy just wasn't into it anymore. He'd be asleep on a couch. As for Ozzy getting kicked out, hurt, to him having someone like Iommi, who he knew orchestrated it, felt like being hanged by a jury of murderers. And just when you think time would heal, things might have gotten worse over the years, especially with the lawsuit over percentage splits of Black Sabbath after the band was officially no more. Iommi took Ozzy to court over the issue, and this rubbed the former vocalist the wrong way. He hated the fact that they couldn't talk about things and had to take legal actions against each other, like they didn't used to be the tightest of pals. In the world of rock and roll, grudges do not fade quietly. But if people this close to Ozzy could wrong him, how about people with different ideals from him? That's the case with artist number 6, John Lydon. Sex Pistols' John Lydon couldn't have been any more different from Ozzy. It was like they were on opposite spectrums of British rock. That stylistic distance helps explain why their public clash in 2011 landed so easily in the tabloids. It wasn't born of a long private vendetta, but of a famous punk provocateur aiming a famous metal survivor and a family pushing back hard. Lydon didn't open by throwing stones. He started by praising Sabbath's early work. He called Paranoid one of the greatest singles ever, the kind of compliment that could silence a room. That made what came next feel deliberate. He pivoted from praise to a sharp moral judgment. In a short press run around his picture book, he accused Ozzy of trading on a loser lifestyle, mocked the lurid rumors about drug-fueled excess, and argued that the image Ozzy once projected could be harmful if glamorized to impressionable fans. For Lydon, this wasn't just music criticism, it was a cultural argument about responsibility. Lydon wasn't ranting about guitar riffs, he was moralizing. To him, celebrity images carry weight. He argued that boards and magazines don't just tell stories, they influence behavior. This was about culture, not music. The reaction was immediate and personal. Kelly Osbourne, Ozzy's daughter and the family's loud, loyal public defender, answered in print with a column that read like a shield and a slap. She called Lydon a bitter old queen, accused him of trolling for publicity to sell a book, and reminded readers that Ozzy had been sober for years. Kelly's response changed the tone. What had been a pointed, philosophical rebuke from one elder musician to another suddenly looked like an attack on a family's honor. The media loved it. Clips and headlines turned the exchange into a short, sharp celebrity skirmish. That inflation says more about how celebrity stories are told than it does about either man. Lydon had praised Ozzy's music before he criticized his persona. Kelly defended her father but didn't produce evidence of a private vendetta. The real story is quieter. Two icons with different moral languages collided, and a family pushed back when it felt its name was being dragged through the mud. The next artist said some pretty nasty things about Ozzy and got the full fury of his hatred. And that person is artist number 5, Bruce Dickinson. It's hard to imagine two of heavy metal's most iconic voices being at odds. On one side, Ozzy Osbourne, the man who helped invent heavy metal with Black Sabbath. On the other hand, Bruce Dickinson, the operatic voice of Iron Maiden, a band that carried the genre into stadiums across the globe. You'd think there would be nothing but respect between them, and for a while there was. Bruce has often said he grew up listening to Sabbath, that Ozzy's music was part of his DNA. But what began as admiration would, years later, erupt into one of the ugliest feuds in metal history. In 2005, during Ozzfest, Iron Maiden were one of the festival's headliners, and Bruce, never one to hold back, made comments on stage about sound issues, corporate sponsorships, and even mocked the Osbournes' MTV reality show. To Bruce, it was just being brutally honest, keeping with his reputation for speaking his mind. But to Sharon Osbourne, who was running Ozzfest and fiercely protective of her husband, it felt like a public insult. And that's when things got ugly. On August 20th in San Bernardino, the feud spectacularly burst into the open. As Iron Maiden performed, their set was suddenly disrupted. Fans began pelting the stage with eggs, bottle caps, and lighters. At times, the sound cut out. The chaos was no accident. Sharon Osbourne herself admitted later that she orchestrated the sabotage. This was something she wasn't shy to show. While this feud had more to do with his wife than him, Ozzy wasn't going to come forward and make his wife look like a crazy woman to save face. Bruce did say some harsh things about Sharon too, and this was enough to hate him for it, but for the most part, Ozzy really just hated how Bruce handled things, not really him himself. But this isn't the first time Ozzy has made enemies out of another rock star. He did that with artist number 4, Gene Simmons. Back in the mid-1970s, Kiss and Black Sabbath shared the road. It was loud, competitive, and theatrical, two bands trying to own the night. That rivalry looked fierce at the time, but it was the kind of tough love clash that touring life produces. Fast forward to the 2000s. This story didn't explode over music, it exploded over words. Gene made public digs at the Osbournes and their reality show, and Sharon Osbourne took it personally. Here's the hidden piece. Most of the venom came from Sharon defending her family, not from Ozzy personally leading a vendetta. When a protector speaks loudly, it looks like a family war. And Ozzy, though not at the front of the heat, picked his family over musical association, and this is why he was at odds with Gene Simmons. You couldn't mess with Sharon Osbourne and not have to deal with her husband. Luckily, this was the hottest thing that would ever happen between the Kiss singer and the Ozzy estate. After that heated exchange, Simmons apologized, and the hatchet was, publicly at least, buried. Over the years, the tone changed. In a recent interview, Simmons spoke warmly about Ozzy and even paid tribute to him.
Ozzy was always Ozzy. Through disco, through foipo, through whatever musical genre there were.
But not all tributes are reciprocated, because when Ozzy didn't love from this next artist, he became a hater. Artist number 3, Paul McCartney. They say you should never meet your heroes, and at first, that saying didn't seem to hold any weight when Ozzy Osbourne came in contact with Paul McCartney. In the 50s and 60s, there was no escaping the Beatles. They practically made up most of what the British music scene was at the time, and Ozzy Osbourne was still a teenager when the Beatles were at their peak. So, as an aspiring artist, they were his idols. He'd grown up on their songs. The shock of hearing She Loves You was the spark that pushed him toward music. And when Ozzy had risen to fame, it made meeting his idol a possibility. When he did, he was starstruck, genuinely moved, and thrilled simply to be in the presence of the man who helped make him want to play music in the first place. But when Ozzy met Paul, he wanted more than just a moment with him. He wanted something that would last forever, even when the two of them were no more. He wanted a collaboration. After all, Paul was the reason he had felt so inspired to make it as far as he did. Working with his ideal would have meant the world to him. It would have been a full circle moment, but Paul McCartney denied him this when Ozzy asked Paul to play bass on one of his tracks. Paul said no. This shattered Ozzy. What was a polite decline felt like utter rejection, and from his idol. But the truth is, Paul didn't say no to spite Ozzy or because he hated him. It was actually quite the opposite. Paul felt there really wasn't anything he could add to Ozzy's track. It was already perfect. Despite all his good intentions, Ozzy still felt a type of way about this. Given the real reason why Paul said no, Ozzy's frustration couldn't be justified. But there's a reason why the late Black Sabbath singer was bitter about it. Paul denied him the chance to brag and boast that he had worked with his idol, that he had the legendary Paul McCartney credited on one of his tracks. Although the type of hatred Ozzy felt wasn't the blood-boiling type, he was still pretty bummed. But this didn't change the rapport they both had. Numerous times after this incident, they had been seen publicly exchanging pleasantries in a way that no one could tell how Ozzy felt about Paul. Maybe you can meet your idols, just don't ask them to play bass for a song on your album. While Ozzy has hated British artists of the older generation, he's also had misunderstandings with the younger generation. Enter artist number 2, Britney Spears. The thing about Ozzy Osbourne and Britney Spears is that he didn't start out hating her. On a podcast, all Ozzy did was express how tired he was of seeing videos of Britney Spears on the internet. This reaction can't be classified as one of hatred, but more like harmless disgust. But here's the problem. Britney Spears didn't see this as a harmless reaction to her content on the internet. To her, it felt like an attack and a provocation. She got defensive and fired back by telling Ozzy and his wife to kindly F off. Seeing how far Britney took things, an escalation was the last thing that Ozzy wanted, so he went ahead to apologize. But was he really sorry though? Because along with the apology came criticism of her dancing, and the way that Ozzy sounded came off as a backhanded critique. And the only thing that the public got from this was that Ozzy was sorry that Britney had to react like that. And he still maintains his stance on her dancing being a sore to watch. While this was one of his less serious feuds, it was clear that Ozzy did not like Britney one bit. But the last artist on our list is someone Ozzy never got to reconcile with before he died. How could he? This man mocked an entire race and tried to steal his music. Number 1 on the list isn't even British or a rock star, but he's more troublesome. He's Kanye West. In 2010, nobody had a Kanye West and Ozzy Osbourne collaboration on their bingo cards, but on Kanye West's Hell of a Life song, he sampled Black Sabbath's Iron Man. It's hard to imagine a rock sound on a hip-hop track, but it's Kanye West, and he managed to make it happen. It was a success, and Ozzy actually personally gave the green light and the clearance necessary for the hip-hop legend to use his song. Fast forward more than a decade later in 2022, Kanye, who was now known as Ye, was working on his album titled Vultures, and he wanted another Ozzy Osbourne sample. He wanted to use the Iron Man song again, but for a live performance for a track. But this time Ozzy said no. There was no way he was going to let that happen. By this time, Kanye West was now going by the name Ye, but that wasn't the only thing that had changed about him. He was a divorced man who lost custody of his kids and had a public track record of very anti-Semitic statements. The worst part about his remarks is that he wasn't ready to take it back.
I see good things about Hitler also. The Jew, I love everyone.
Anytime he made a public appearance, he was bound to say something worse than the last time. And this was exactly why Ozzy didn't want to let him use his song in his new album this time around. Ozzy wanted nothing to do this version of Kanye West. He publicly stated, "I want no association with this man." But Kanye isn't used to not having his way. He has made doing what he wants his entire mantra. So during a listening party in early February of 2024, Kanye played a track where he used the audio that Ozzy refused to clear for him to use. This made Ozzy hate Kanye even more. And what really made Ozzy mad was that by his anti-Semitic comments, he was disrespecting his wife Sharon, who is a Jew. Sharon Osbourne, being the less calm one between her and her husband, was even going as far as threatening to take legal action against the Chicago artist. But Ozzy wasn't satisfied with just taking a legal stance. He wanted to be the one to make fun of the man who was disrespecting him and his wife. So he trolled him by dressing up along with his wife as Ye and Bianca for Halloween. This got people on the internet laughing, and it surely must have made Kanye angry. But that was the goal. Ozzy hated Kanye West, and he wanted to make that clear. Do you think any of them should have at least reconciled with Ozzy Osbourne before he kicked the bucket? And which artist do you think would have been impossible for Ozzy to be chill with? Let us know all your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.